Justice.
Community.
Accountability.
Freedom.
Repair.
Liberation. Unlocking change.
Unlocking change.
Unlocking change.
Accountability. Community.
Accountability.
Repair, liberation. Unlocking change.
Unlocking change.
Unlocking change. Unlocking change.
Unlocking change.
This is Colorado Radio for Justice, and this is Unlocking Change. I'm your host, Tiffany McCoy.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan Connerow.
Today, we're in a conversation with Rebecca Wallace, the Policy Director at Colorado Freedom Fund. We're diving into the impact that cash bonds have on people in jails, what this means for our communities, and much more.
And Rebecca shares with us Colorado Freedom Fund's goals, wins, and dreams, along with her personal vision for a future where everyone in Colorado is free.
You will never hear us declare victory until they're all free. But we will say, this was a good change. This had an important liberatory impact. And look, the sky didn't fall. We didn't see a change in crime rates. And even the systems that we'd like to fall apart didn't fall apart.
That's right now on Unlocking Change. It's Colorado Radio for Justice, and this is Unlocking Change. I'm your host, Tiffany McCoy.
And I'm Ryan Connerow.
We have our guest, Rebecca Wallace, who is the Policy Director for the Colorado Freedom Fund. Hello, welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, Tiffany. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome. So glad you're here.
Thanks, Ryan.
What is Colorado Freedom Fund? What's your work?
So Colorado Freedom Fund is the state of Colorado's only nonprofit criminal legal bond fund. It was started in 2018 by our founder and executive director, Elizabeth Epps, and it started as a Black Mamas bailout for people, Black mamas, who were charged and not convicted of a crime and held in a jail in Colorado. And they were in jail only because they could not afford to pay cash bond to get out. Elizabeth asked the community to contribute money to help get Black mamas free for Mother's Day. And the community more than responded. And from that grew what is now a statewide organization, still run by Elizabeth, that helps free people across the state of Colorado who are stuck in jail simply because they cannot afford to buy their freedom. And as part of Colorado Freedom Fund, we also in 2021 started a policy arm. That's when Elizabeth brought me over to start that policy arm. And we now have a small policy team that works mostly at the Capitol to both end wealth-based detention, fight carceral initiatives, and help push for policies that will keep our neighbors healthy, safe, and free, and uncaged.
Wow. Thank you for this work.
I love that. I love that it was called Black Mamas. I love that. I was a young Black mama when I got incarcerated. I was 19. My daughter was only 5 months old. And I got incarcerated for first-degree murder, and I did not have a bond, ever. The whole time I was in the county jail. I was in the county jail for 17 months. And I always felt inside myself that if I had a bond, if I had a chance, that I wouldn't have lost my daughter, right? Because I could have been out, and I could have been securing her somewhere to live and all those things. Instead, I was locked up and couldn't do anything. So I do think this work is very important, and it definitely could have changed my life. So I'm excited for all the lives it is changing and will change in the future.
Thank you for just sharing all that background. And it really brings up something current that just happened here in Colorado. So until a few years ago, there was no bond for people charged with F1, with homicide. There was no bond. So nobody was getting free. And then there was this technical legal thing that happened. When the death penalty ban passed, we eliminated the death penalty. That actually led to some folks charged with F1 to get bond set. And a handful of them were able to get pretrial release. And especially for mamas who were in a position to care for their kids, or young people who were charged, who had an opportunity to go back and be home. Maybe they were on an ankle monitor at home, but they were allowed to be with a parent figure. We have been able to observe during this brief period of time that there were real opportunities for people to fight their case, to create good community connections, to show a judge that even if the worst happened and they were convicted of that crime, that they did not need to be put away in prison for an enormously long period of time.
Yeah.
And that happened for a few years. And then just last November, there was a ballot initiative that ended that. And I think we reflect here at Colorado Freedom Fund that we wish we had done more to help educate people about how, even for extremely serious crimes, how opportunities for pretrial release can be not just good for the person, but for their child, for the entire community.
Do you think that everyone deserves to get a bond and everyone in every situation deserves to be free? Or I don't know. It's just a question that I've thought about over the years.
So one of the reasons I came to Colorado Freedom Fund, I had been at the ACLU for about a decade. And then I met Elizabeth Epps. And she is a abolitionist, Black queer community organizer with lived experience in the criminal legal system. And I started learning from her about abolition. And she's a great teacher of it. I still consider myself a student of abolition. But one of the things that we always hear is like, well, what about this one person who committed a serious violent offense? What do you want to do with them right now? And I think for the broader context for abolition is not about what we do right now in this exact moment with that person. It's how do we create the circumstances in our community where people have their needs met in their community so that prisons and jails become obsolete. And, I live in a community with good, clean water, lots of great access to fresh foods, great open space, quality education, minimal police. That's the environment I live in. And what we question is, what if everyone had access to environments like that, where, when my child struggled with mental health, that we had easy access to meet his needs with therapy or whatever was needed for him in that moment. And so we look at abolition is really about creating the circumstances where everyone gets to be healthy, safe, and free. And so we do not currently have the exact answer for what to do for an individual who may be in a state where they might, and I think this is a very small set of people, might have immediately uncontrollable violent impulses, although it's probably not prison that's going to make them better.
Yeah.
And so just because we may not have the perfect answer for that doesn't mean we can't build from the ground up a system where people get their needs met in community. Colorado is starting pretty near the bottom. We are I think last I saw, 47th lowest access to on-demand behavioral health services in the community.
Wow.
And so when people are asking me about this rare individual who they may view as needing a specific kind of unique containment because of violent episodes, I'm asking them about, the hundreds of thousands of people who are in community who just want access to care. And what if we started there? That's the pipeline to our mass incarceration problem in Colorado. So let's start there. Abolition is all about building. So it's not just open the prisons and jails and that's abolition. It's like, how do we create community care for individuals so that they have their needs met within their own communities and are not pushed into the prison system?
You're framing this question of how do we build this? And I'm wondering if you can speak to how Colorado Freedom Fund is in that work. Like what's happening right now and what's on the horizon in your work, your day-to-day towards that building?
Sure. Let me talk a little bit about the bond fund part, which is primarily run by Elizabeth Epps, but which the rest of the team support her on when we're not in the middle of legislative session. And we get requests from all over the state for people who are incarcerated simply because they can't afford to pay their bond. We are not able to help the vast majority of people who reach out, but we work really hard to identify people who we can really maximize pretrial freedom, so get the most liberty for our buck and for their buck. We also focus heavily on people in the competency system. So there's a lot of, because we are the 47th lowest access to mental health care treatment in the country, we know that our jails and prisons are our largest provider of behavioral health care in the state. As a result, we are more and more pushing people who are often found incompetent to stand trial into our criminal legal system. And in the pretrial space, this is really a problem. Once you have been found to be incompetent, you can't complete your case. So people who would otherwise even want to plead and end their case and might even be able to get probation and go home, they're not allowed to plead. And those individuals are often just stuck in what we call pretrial competency purgatory. And so we work really hard to identify those folks, work with them, work with family members, social service providers, and identify people who have a good plan for being able to be released and have the care that they want and need, and where cash bond is really the issue. And we identify people who have just a few $1,000s is the only reason that they may be stuck for a year in jail just waiting for a competency. It's not even treatment is the wrong word to call it, but the state to address them in terms of their mental health issues. So we focus on individuals for whom vulnerability is particularly high. That includes competency. And a lot of times we think about if we can focus on Black trans women who are amongst the most vulnerable people in our jails and prisons, if we can focus on their freedom, we know everybody will get free.
Mm. Because the systems and structures will shift around that one effort, that one case, is what you're saying?
Well, I mean, when we are fighting for freedom for our most vulnerable people, we know that as we press back on that system, that if it does shift a bit, that the most obvious beneficiaries are actually going to be the people who are already lined up systematically to be most benefited by the system. I mean, to call it beneficial is a little bit challenging because everybody in the mass incarceration system, regardless of race, is a victim of that system. But some people are more harmed by it than others.
I feel like maybe some people who can't afford cash bond also struggle in other ways in their lives, like maybe can't afford an apartment or struggle with addiction. Is there things that Colorado Freedom Fund offers after people are released to help them with those other struggles to make sure they stay out on bond and don't turn to other situations that might bring them back to incarceration?
It's a really good question. We do not provide social services. We are a staff of 3, but we do work really hard to coordinate with social service providers and the individuals and their family to confirm that there is a release plan in place for that individual. What's amazing, though, I will tell you, is that outside of individuals who might be in a very heightened state related to some of the issues we're talking about here, most people don't actually need much to be able to show up for court and resolve their case. And the important thing to remember about pretrial bond is that it's supposed to do 2 things. It is supposed to make sure that the person returns to court and doesn't commit another serious offense. The state of Colorado has more than a decade of data that tells us that the vast majority of people who are released on bond, regardless of what they are accused of doing and regardless of what kind of risk score they get, are going to return and complete their case, and they are not going to have an accusation of a serious offense while they're out on bond. It is a remarkably safe population, and most people need nothing besides a court reminder. And that doesn't mean that their lives or the issues that might have brought them into the criminal legal system are like fixed because of this. But I think sometimes people think that the bond system needs to be used to address everything that's going on in the person's life. And I think part of the way we think about it is the more we use the bond system, the pretrial bond system, to try to address all the underlying problems that people have, the more that we're going to hear justifications for all the attempts to run people who are struggling with mental health and substance use into jail to get treatment. And this is not a theoretical problem. It's happening every single year at the Capitol. We see new pieces of legislation that are called public health pieces of legislation that are They said these are really going to help people, like substance use treatment as a condition of bond. We should mandate that. And then if people don't engage in treatment, we'll hold them in jail pre-trial because they didn't engage in treatment. That was a bill from just 2 years ago that we fought. And we see these efforts all the time. And I think we really want to disentangle the notion that pretrial bond should be used to connect people to services. We want them to resolve their case, move on with their lives, and have access to services and community.
I think you might be touching on this already, Rebecca, but I'm imagining a person who's like, why not continue with the Department of Corrections, our jail systems providing mental health support? And they're doing it already. Why not continue to fold those in? I mean, how would you answer that?
I've got two ways I want to answer it. I mean, one is the easiest answer is just talk to sheriffs and the head of the DOC about whether or not they think that they're a good provider of mental health and substance use disorder treatment for people inside that are stuck inside. I have never seen more widespread agreement amongst law enforcement than on the topic that this is not their area of expertise. They are doing the best that they can with what they have. And especially the sheriffs are saying, we do not have the ability to provide in-depth mental health and substance use disorder treatment for people in our jails, especially in rural jurisdictions. We hear this over and over again. I can give you a small example right now. Colorado Freedom Fund's priority bill that has been going through this legislative session is to end lengthy sentences in municipal courts for poverty offenses. Right now, people can be jailed for up to a year for camping through our municipal courts. Same offense, 10-day maximum at the state courts. We want to fix that. Guess who supports it? Counties and many sheriffs. And when sheriffs talk about why they support it, it's because they say people inside our jails who are charged with these municipal poverty offenses, they are not a risk to the public, but they become worse inside our jails. We cannot meet their very serious mental health and physical needs. It's a huge liability risk for them. And people are leaving worse than when they came in. They no longer have their property. They no longer have connections to social services providers. They lost their place in line for housing. So this is like an area where actually there's pretty wide agreement that jails and prisons are not doing a great job of providing these services because they are primarily there to control people. So that's number one. But number two, we back in 2022, I think, was the big fentanyl bill where Democrats came together to felonize possession of the most dangerous and addictive drug that sort of we had seen in modern eras here in Colorado. And they thought the answer to that will be to make it a felony to possess anything above a gram, which is a very small amount. And so they came together to do that. And they said, don't worry, we're going to pair it with these opportunities for treatment. Well, in the wake of that, or during that, public health came together and were unified. And when I'm talking about doctors, people with lived experience, providers, they were all unified in you're going to send people into the shadows. They're less likely to access treatment. You're not going to stop them from using. This is not a choice that people are making. And they were 100% unified in that. And over the objection of a completely unified public health coalition, legislators again and again said, I'm going to vote for this bill in the name of public health.
Wow.
The thing that is the positive that has come out of this is, I think for the first time in many years, there's public health and criminal legal reformers working together, like in a tight coalition called Right Response Colorado. That grew out of fighting fentanyl felonization. And since that time, although we have not had the juice to pass the kinds of policies we want to pass, we have been able to work in coalition to really bring the full public health lens to defeat carceral initiatives, including, for instance, several years in a row now, efforts to felonize possession of fentanyl below 1 gram. And when I think about what does the future of criminal legal reform look like, I think having conversations about criminal legal reform through a public health lens has opportunities for Colorado that are yet to be explored. And I think abolition became a framework to apply even outside of the things we didn't know. So like there's these things that we learned by talking to people who have lived experience, and then there's things we don't know. But if you look at it through an abolitionist framework, and we can talk about where do people best have their needs met, and what does it look like to have a community where people are healthy, safe, and free, because we do have examples of those communities. You know, our broad goal is for Coloradans to be healthy, safe, and free. And prisons and jails are perhaps the most clear obstacle. So the goal has got to be, from our perspective, reducing the number of people who are in jails and prisons. You know, we're in a trifecta of blue in Colorado. We've got, right, a blue governor and blue House and a blue Senate. And yet my experience is that there's still wide agreement among our electeds in expanding the net of incarceration in Colorado as a public safety mechanism.
You're saying there's wide agreement that that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah. We pass new crimes every single year with no evidence that it will improve safety whatsoever. We talk about crime increases that are not supported by the data. I do think Democratic leadership knows that despite the rhetoric around a crime tsunami over the course of COVID, that we are now below 2019 levels in terms of our crime rates. And that is not just a Colorado thing. It is happening all over the country because crime is driven by socioeconomic factors such as isolation, wealth, like huge wealth gap. We saw a 100% increase in homelessness during the time that our property crime rates went up. This is not a mystery. We had this little golden age, horribly driven by the murder of George Floyd, where there was this real interest, including amongst white moderates, in playing a role in reducing the footprint of mass incarceration. But the commitment to that was so superficial that all we needed was the rhetoric of a crime wave to change that trajectory.
And what is that? Is that human fear?
I mean, we are losing the messaging war right now. And we need stronger leadership from our Democrats telling the truth about what they know. They have the information. They know that crime rates are down. And I think they also know that increasing incarceration may actually increase crime over time.
Prison makes better criminals. I went to prison not a criminal and not knowing how to do certain things and steal and lie and cheat and all those things. But you learn those things in prison. And you learn them because there are people like that, but you also learn them because you need to learn ways to survive in prison. When you don't have enough money for food or enough money for this and you're hungry and you want these things, you learn survival skills in there.
And then you get out of prison and you've learned a certain set of skills in prison. You get out of prison and there's obstacles to getting housing, to getting employment, to getting your kids back. And all of those things, I think, like create this bigger cycle back into prison. And I do think that our legislators have all the information they need to know that. And yet our prison budget a few years ago just broke $1 billion. Last year was 1.2 billion. This year, as we're cutting K through 12 funding, we are going to grow our prison budget even more. And so we know where our priorities are, and we need stronger leadership from our Democrats. Okay, that said, we have had some successes in the pretrial space. We focused on due process. So we were able to create a requirement of bond hearings within 48 hours of being arrested, because the vast majority of people who are released pretrial, they're going to be released within 24 hours of seeing a judge. So when you have people waiting 2 weeks to see a judge and you move that timeline up to 48 hours, you're going to see massive release happening. We believe we're at a point where we can say we have seen a steady 25% decrease in the jail population since starting on serious pretrial reform back in 2019. That feels pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Those are people who are not behind bars every single night. And I think it's been about a 3-year steady, pretty flat rate. And so, we like to think that there are ways to work on the system that there's incremental is a really complicated word because there's a lot of criticism of incremental change, and for good reason, because too often we see people make a small change in the system and then declare victory. You will never hear us declare victory until they're all free. But we will say, this was a good change. This had an important liberatory impact. And look, the sky didn't fall. We didn't see a change in crime rates. What we learned is that people can be released earlier, and even the systems that we'd like to fall apart didn't fall apart. So let's keep going. And we worked on that with court reminders is a great other example. We know that people appear for court much more when they get a court reminder. And when they appear for court more, they don't get a warrant for their arrest for failure to appear, which is one of the most common reasons that people get arrested. So we worked really hard to create a statewide court reminder program, the first of its kind. It's here in Colorado.
It's real.
It's real.
I've seen it.
So those...
And it sounds so simple.
It's so simple. And now these are things that we had to fight for. It took us 6 years in both at the ACLU and Colorado Freedom Fund to pass 48-hour bond hearings. And now they're just what everybody expects. And that gives me hope. We had to fight. And there were people on the floor disagreeing with this, right? And now nobody disagrees with it. Of course, we should give people a prompt bond hearing. Mm-hmm. So that makes me think we will also get there with cash bond.
I wonder if you could take us into your future. What's on the horizon for you and all of this really critical work that you're doing?
Well, not for me, but for the community and for Colorado Freedom Fund, I think in the short term, we would like to see reining in of some of the abuses in municipal courts, which are essentially prosecuting poverty across the state of Colorado, primarily jailing people for being unhoused and the crimes that are directly associated with it. We're working on that in a large community coalition that we're really proud of. And then in the long term, we are looking at our partners in places like Illinois, where we had incredible abolitionists lead the way from Chicago Bond Fund to end cash bail and really work hard to minimize carceral replacements. And we're learning from our friends there, and we're figuring out what can we import to Colorado in a way that we feel confident will have a substantial liberatory impact, meaning get people free.
I'm really excited about all the work that you're doing. And I know people incarcerated, it's really easy to feel alone in there. And I just feel like they're not alone anymore. So there are people out here fighting for people's freedom and rights and all those things. And I feel really happy for the people who are going through things right now, that people care and people understand. It's really hard to feel like somebody understands. And I feel like you guys understand.
Thanks for sharing that. There's a lot of people in our community who are really committed to helping people get free from cages. And I think maybe we don't do as good of a job as we all should to make sure that folks who have the actual experiences in those cages are right at the table. I'm glad you're right here.
Me too.
You are experiencing Unlocking Change on Colorado Radio for Justice. I am Tiffany McCoy with Ryan Connerow and our guest, Rebecca Wallace. Thank you for joining us today. Unlocking Change is a production of Colorado Radio for Justice. Catch a fresh episode of Unlocking Change every first Friday of the month on our airwaves, and find it on demand wherever you get your podcasts.